welcome back to the show. I have Dr. Evan Hirsch here with me today. And you guys tune in. We are going to talk about fatigue because I think, especially over the course of the last year that we've all experienced, our fatigue might be even worse at this point, right?
hmm
So, Evan, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
So fill them in. Like let's hear. I want to know your story because I know all of us have some sort of pretty much health issue that bring us to where we're at. So I'm assuming you had to tackle fatigue in and of itself.
I did. Yeah. When I graduated medical school, I came out west and I started my family medicine residency. And a month in, I met my wife, Stacy, my soon to be wife, and we fell in love. And 3 months later, she couldn't get out of bed. So that was really my first exposure. And it took her 3 years to get, mostly better.
Okay.
There's been some tweaks along the way after that. But at that point, I felt like I was at the top of my learning game and I started asking questions, of my attendings and conferences and whatever, and there really wasn't much help. I was in conventional medicine and it was either thyroid, liver disease, heart disease, cancer, lung disease. There wasn't much in between. So, and I was working 80 hours a week. So I really couldn't help her, and I felt incredibly powerless. Here's this person that I love. I can't help her. I felt guilt, felt shame, all this sort of stuff. And then she came out of fatigue. We got married, had a child. I started my own practice. And 3 years after that, I got fatigue. And my fatigue lasted for 5 years, and it
Oh,
just about destroyed everything. My brain fog was so bad that I couldn't remember the patient sitting in front of me. I could only work a couple hours a day. I had to keep hiring people. I had 4,000 square feet of office space and 10 employees, and I had to keep hiring people to do what I was doing because I just couldn't keep my head up.
right.
And it just about destroyed my marriage. My wife is just coming out of her own fatigue and needs me to just do the dishes, help out with the newborn. And I couldn't. I could just lie on the couch and, my daughter would daddy play with me. I couldn't play with her. So it was an awful time in my life. And finally, I said, no more. I'm not a very good patient, or I wasn't. Now I am. But I wasn't prioritizing myself. And I realized that I needed to make a change. And so I started making a change in my business. And then I also realized that and I was already practicing functional medicine at this point. I did my first functional medicine training in 2007 when I came out of residency, like my first
Wow.
month into my new practice. So I was already practicing functional medicine and helping people with fatigue, but wasn't applying it to myself. And so that's when I was like, okay, I know if I find all of the causes that I'm gonna get better. And I went after the ones that I was already helping people with, which were mainly deficiencies.
Mhm.
And then the ones that I didn't really know that I had to do more training on were the toxicities, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that
Yeah.
really helped, and as I got rid of every single one, I would just keep getting better and better until I got the great energy that I have today.
I love it. And it's one of those things I think we've all dealt with it, especially going through med school, going through any graduate school program, even chiropractic school. Like I mean, we're burning the candle from both ends. And then all of a sudden, it's like you're going into practice, you're doing all of this, you're helping everybody else. And again, like I was there with you. Like I hear ya, like, because I went through my own healing story of that too, where it was like, wow, I'm going home at lunch to sleep so I can see my afternoon patients because I can't make it through, however
Yeah.
many hour day. So I get it. So, what are some of the nutritional deficiencies or different deficiencies that you're looking for with people? And then I really want to deep dive into the toxicity because that's something a lot of people don't talk about.
Yeah. And so if I can start big picture, so like
Mhm.
there's 10 real causes of fatigue that I found once you rule out of all that conventional stuff, making sure that it's
Yeah.
not anything real bad. And so those can really be grouped into deficiencies and toxicities. And those deficiencies are deficiencies in hormones like adrenals, thyroid, sex hormones, deficiencies in mitochondrial function. The mitochondria produces 70 to 80% of our energy in the body, is found in every cell except for red blood cells. Deficiencies in nutrients. So here we're talking about vitamin D, a vitamin B12, other B vitamins, and minerals like magnesium and iron. And then deficiencies in neurotransmitters, so not enough serotonin or dopamine or norepinephrine, epinephrine. And then deficiencies in lifestyle habits. So not enough sleep. This is where we all start, right? Not enough sleep, not enough good food, not enough movement, not enough sleep,
Yeah.
right? So those
That's
are, oh, yeah.
after coming through 2020, right? I feel like I've seen that with a lot of my clients where people are like, I'm just not sleeping. Like just the
Right.
stress levels and that they're not sleeping. So then that's going to be a whole nother cascade that
Hmm.
begins everything else. Okay. So let's talk then a little bit about the toxicity.
Yeah. And I should say that what I consider to be like a level one problem is
Hmm.
if somebody has fatigue and it's resolved with lifestyle modification.
Okay.
It's like a level one problem. If they modify their lifestyle and they're still tired, then they fix it by taking things to replace any sort of deficiencies, that's a level two problem.
Okay.
And then if they fix that and then they still have issues, then that's a level three problem. And that's addressing the toxicities. So in the toxicities, we're talking about these things that are in your body that aren't supposed to be in there, as opposed to the deficiencies, which are things that aren't in the body that are supposed to be, right? So the toxicities are things like heavy metals. 100,000 pounds of mercury are dumped into our oceans every single year. 70% of all lipsticks have lead in them. Or things like chemicals, where 84,000 different chemicals we're exposed to on a regular basis, and most of those haven't been appropriately evaluated by the FDA or other governing bodies. These are things like herbicides and pesticides and plastics and insecticides, formaldehydes. And then things like molds. Half of all the buildings in first world countries have water damage, and most of those have molds. And molds are neurotoxins, and they are incredibly insidious and one of the most common causes of fatigue that aren't readily discussed or understood by the general population.
Yeah.
So that's heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and then infections. The CDC said a couple years ago that actually Lyme and its co-infections are not 30,000 new cases per year, but actually 300,000 new cases per year.
Wow.
So this is a huge problem. And it's not just Lyme or Borrelia, it's also these co-infections. So whether it's Epstein-Barr virus or whether it's Bartonella, which will cause things like pain on the bottom of the feet, usually misdiagnosed as plantar fasciitis, muscle cramps, headaches, body pain, usually misdiagnosed as fibromyalgia, TMJ, sleep problems, anxiety, depression. There's like a whole slew of symptoms that people can get from that. Or something like babesia, which is otherwise known as like North American malaria, where people will feel spontaneously sweaty or they'll be generally the hottest person in the room. They'll have awful sleep and they'll have anxiety to the point of panic attacks and depression to the point of suicidal thoughts and usually some sort of shortness of breath. So that's just some of the infections that we'll see.
So then why is it so hard to treat the fatigue when, I mean, how do you even, when somebody comes in, where do you start with them?
So, in step one of my program, it's all about finding the causes that somebody has. Because everybody's got different causes. So there's these 10 categories of causes that we're looking at, and everybody has 8 out of 10 of them generally. And as you can tell, there are, a number of different sub causes you can say for each of these things. Like I talked about hormones, there's adrenals,
Yeah.
thyroid, sex hormones, sort of thing. So everybody's got a different combination. And so let's say somebody has causes 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and somebody else has causes 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. Obviously, their treatments are going to be different. And this is also the reason why, Joe Schmo over here got a B12 shot and he felt better and you did and you didn't feel anything.
Right.
Right. So once you know what causes you have, then you can be really targeted in what your therapies are going to be.
Do you go through lab tests with them or how do you go
Mhm.
about testing those things?
Well, what I've found is that 75% of these causes can be determined by symptoms alone.
Mhm.
So people can go through the process and figure out very quickly, just based off of the symptoms, which causes they have. And then for those 25% that really need it, or if you want to get some additional lab testing to make sure that what you were thinking was correct on your symptoms, that's where the lab testing comes in, but it's not required initially for sure.
Let's dig in a little bit more with the chronic infections. Like, especially I'm in Michigan, right? So Lyme disease is a big deal up here. And I
Hmm.
think undiagnosed Lyme is a huge deal.
Hmm.
So can we talk about the chronic infections along that line, along with Lyme disease and all of that you just said with Babesia and all of those and those co-infections?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the testing isn't great. So a lot of people will go to their practitioner and they will say, I think I have Lyme disease, because usually the practitioner is not going to think about it unless they're either a functional medicine doc,
Yeah.
environmental medicine doc, that'll
Right.
work, or they're a Lyme literate doc or a Lyme literate practitioner. And so if they're not thinking it, they're never going to diagnose it. And so generally the patient is asking for the test and they're going to run a standard Western blot or an ELISA, which are highly inaccurate because they're looking at the immune system's reaction to the bug. So
Mhm.
that's only if the bug is actually floating around in a spot where the immune system can see it and react to it. And it requires an intact and functional immune system. So if you have an immune system that's not working right because you have heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, allergies, negative emotional patterns, EMFs, whatever it is, then you're not going to get an accurate test.
Mhm.
And it's always this combination, right? So it's never just one thing, as we discussed, right? It's this multitude of causes, which is going to affect the immune system and consequently going to affect the testing. So that's the thing. So people think that they have Lyme, they go see their doc, the doc says, no, you don't, based off of this test, which isn't a good test.
Right. Right.
So that's a major problem
Mm,
in terms of getting help.
yeah. So how do you know when you can help somebody with fatigue? Because like I think we both take that philosophy that the body heals when given the right opportunity, right? Like it just sometimes we need to stop messing with it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's really just about the causes once again. If somebody has addressed all of those causes, if they've
Mhm.
found all of those causes because it's really simplified, it's this process of find the problem
Mhm.
and fix the problem. There just happen to be multiple problems that are happening at a time. And oftentimes there are layers and a way to remove the problems in a correct order. But generally that's what it is. And so if somebody comes in and says, I've assessed for all of these things and I've fixed all of these things and I still have fatigue, that's when I can't help them. Or if they're living in mold, then I can't help them and there's no way for them to get out or they're not willing to do the work. Same thing with negative emotional patterns. If they're not willing to do the work to
Mhm.
change those sorts of things, change the way that they're looking at the world, change their relationships, change their relationship to happiness, or fear or sadness. So if people are willing to do the work and they're willing to go through and find all of those causes, there's no reason why they shouldn't be successful.
No, I love that. Can we deep dive a little bit into mold?
Please.
All
Yeah.
right. So let's talk about that because I think a lot of times, you had just said, I mean, you spoke about all the different toxicity with heavy metals and the co-infections and then the mold, but I don't think ever people realize like it is an important thing. Even for me, like I had gone through it all, did a bunch of stuff, and then lo and behold, was high on ochratoxin. Was like, oh wow, okay, that wasn't on my radar. Like, let's go through and clear this stuff. But it made so much more sense to me. But it is, again, you just said half of all homes, right? In first world countries have some sort of water damage. And I oftentimes hear people saying, but I'm in a new house or I'm in a new building. It doesn't mean just because it's new that there's not necessarily water damage, correct?
Right.
Let's just you start talking about mold. How about that? Break through any of the fallacies that you hear where people are like, well, no. And then, where it's this misconception about mold. It is a big deal. Like you just said, it's a neurotoxin. It can cause that brain fogging. It can cause all sorts of stuff. Actually, it's a really scary deal.
Right. So the first thing to do is to become aware of whether or not you've had any sort of exposures. Sometimes people have had exposures, or a lot of times they've had exposures and they don't know that they've had exposures.
Mhm.
So have you ever had a busted pipe in any home that you've ever lived in, or a leak in the roof in any home that you've ever lived in, or a flood in the basement in any home that you've ever lived in, or any place that you've ever worked in,
Yeah, or
right?
school. Like, I think back
Or
to
school.
mine was I know exactly where it was at. Like, it was years in grad school in one of the buildings, right?
Hmm. Yeah, that musty smell.
Yeah, that came back 20 years later on a lab test.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm,
And that's the thing, is that you could have been exposed when you were 5 years old, but if you weren't doing the things that you need to do in order to get the mold out of your body,
mhm.
like specific binders and detoxifying agents and whatever, and limiting your exposure, then you're not going to get it out of your body. It can still be there 40, 50, 60 years later.
Right.
So that's what's really interesting about mold. So it's having that awareness and realizing, because most of the time when I say to people, "Have you ever had known exposure to mold?" and people will say no.
Yeah.
Always, always. That's the first thing. Well, I shouldn't say always. There's always change. There's always non-alwayses, right? So,
Yeah, but I
like,
also think of like I've got tons of farmland around here, right? And lakes. And you think of like the stuff that are growing in the lakes right now, and then we have no-till farm. Like there's a lot of just mold spores just in our environment as well, right? So,
hay is a huge problem.
yeah.
Anybody, I always ask about horses
Mhm.
because, hay is notoriously moldy. It's sitting out, it gets wet, and it gets moist and it just grows mold.
Yeah. So there's so much. And it's like, it's not to overwhelm people, but know that there's strategic steps to help see the light at the end of the tunnel. We've both
Yeah,
been there.
yeah, for sure. And in the end,
Yeah.
it's really about removing it from your environment, making sure that it's not there, and then removing it from your body. Like you talked about, we use urine mycotoxin testing to determine whether or not you have the toxins that are produced by the mold. Nothing else is going to show you that in a urine test. There are some people who are mold doctors who are doing blood testing to look at different immune system and inflammatory markers, which they believe to be due to mold, but that's just not true. It can be due to any number of biotoxins, whether it's mold or Lyme or other infections. So you always want to look at a urine mycotoxin test to determine whether or not there's mold in the individual. And then you want to make sure you're removing it out of the home and you're removing it out of the body. And so some
Yes.
people may not realize they have mold, but if you have brain fog, if you have fatigue, if you have rashes, if you have itchy ears, itchy anus, those are, or even neuropathies like numbness and tingling in the fingers and toes or burning sensation, oftentimes that can be due to mold. So you need to make sure you get it evaluated.
Absolutely. Do you look at parasites as well?
I do.
Yeah. Because thinking of just so many, it all just correlates, right? Like it's not just, you don't just have one, you end up with all sorts of stuff. All right. Tell us about your program, how they can find out more information and all of that as well.
Yeah, so I'm at fixyourfatigue.com. So FIXYOURFATIGUE.com. And you can dive into the free stuff that I have. I've got a free masterclass, a mini course, free Facebook group where I'm just sharing a whole bunch of information. And if you like what you're hearing and you want to find all of your causes and take a deep dive into this and make sure you never have fatigue again, then get on a call with us and we're happy to see if you're a good fit to work with us.
Awesome. Dr. Evan Hirsch, fixyourfatigue.com. Anything else you want to add?
Um, I think that probably the most important thing is just for people to find a mentor. No matter
Mhm.
what you're doing, whether it's in business or life or whatever, you always want to find somebody who's done what you want to do or has helped other people do that. And because success leaves clues.
Mhm.
Just copy what somebody has done who's been successful, and you're a lot more likely to be successful yourself.
I love it. And especially with health and wellness, finding people that have been there and walked that path beforehand.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on.